In the spring of 1987, I made the best move of my life to marshy Little Smith Island in the very middle of Chesapeake Bay. I moved my family back to the mainland after 3 years, but your heart never leaves a place like that. Smith Island's got the same problems as other low-lying places around the bay. Some landscapes I knew there 30 years ago are beneath the waves now. The aftermath of the nor'easter gives a glimpse of what the island could look like every day later in this century, drowned, washed away by erosion and rising seas. But the more imminent threat is not the disappearance of land, but the disappearance of a culture and the people who have defined it for centuries. Since I left, the island's population's fallen from nearly 500 to under 200. About 40 remain full-time where I lived in Tylerton, an island within an island connected only by water to the other villages of Ewell and Rhodes Point.
Yesterday we didn't sell no number ones.
When a community like Tylerton gets down to a few dozen people, it's obvious every family counts. But the Marshall family really counts. On both sides, they hark back to the beginnings of Smith Island. Marieta's an Evans from the capital city of Ewell, where her family name predominates. Her dad, Elmer, was a prominent waterman, captain of a skipjack that was a pride of the island fleet, dredging oysters under sail all over the Maryland Chesapeake.
And it was so pretty when the dredge boats would sail in on a Friday evening, and the creek was just full of dredge boats, and now there's none.
Dwight grew up in Drum Point, the old-timey name for Tylerton, where about half the names are Marshall. But before that, he'd tell me about his people coming from Shanks's, an island he'd talk about almost like it was another country. In fact, its remnants lie just several hundred yards south and west of where he's living now.
Erosion is terrible. If I had a picture of last year where I crabbed over on the Bayside way, you wouldn't believe how much that's eroded away. It's disturbing, it really is. Down in Shanks's where my great-great-grandparents used to live, it used to be trees. The land was probably a mile to a mile and a half out because they had fruit trees and all kinds of shade trees and trees something like a home now.
Shanks's has become so eroded and shifted around. Dwight used to say if his dad, Russell, who died in the 1970s, were to come back, he'd be lost down there now.
Oh, Dad, he was a character. I used to follow him in the summertime when we were out of school, we'd crab. That's with a dip net that dips crabs off the bottom.
Marieta and Dwight met on the old island star that ferried island high schoolers to the mainland, where they boarded Monday through Friday. Island kids still ferry to Crisfield daily now on a modern catamaran. A few younger ones go to Ewell Elementary School on the Captain Jason.
The school boat that just come here and let off the kids after they graduate, I don't think it's none in the line, no babies. You know, to be the next generation, I mean, that's it.
Marieta and Dwight grew fond at hops held on weekends in Ewell.
When we decided to get married, she said, well, you got to ask Dad. I said, gee. And so I did, and he come out of the bedroom, and he was talking on the telephone, and he was in his drawers with his foot up on the chair, talking to somebody. I said, Captain Elmer, I'd like to marry your daughter. I said, yeah, go ahead. I'll take a lot off me.
I started picking claws when I was 11 years old. I'd get up with my dad at 3 o'clock. I swore up and down I was going to marry a man that I never would have to pick another crab, but that didn't happen either.
We stayed together from then on. Yeah, she was about the love of my life.
Dwight was the consummate bay waterman. Others had bigger, faster boats and fished more gear, but no one was more skilled at maximizing a living from the bay's bounty. He'd talk about how to be a top waterman. You got to drive yourself. And he'd always add, you need a wife who's that way too.
Murray back, man. She worked as hard as I did, and it made a difference.
Dwight and I have always worked together side by side. Typical day for me would be get up at 2 and 2:30 in the morning, pick a bushel of crabs, stop at 6:45, and go to the boat, put your meat on there, come in, put in a tub of clothes, make your beds, line up what you're gonna have for your evening meal, then go down to shanty, cut bait 5 trays of soft crabs and wrap them. Come up, if it was cool enough, you'd cut the grass, get your supper. We'd eat our evening meal by 3 o'clock, and at 4 o'clock you were back out picking again, and by 7 o'clock you were done, had your shower and ready to go to bed by 8 o'clock. When I moved down here, there was over 200 people down here. Big families. It's not any children much anymore. So now we're down to 42 people. You wonder what in the world's happened. I had 4 children, and they neither one live here on the island. I'm proud of their accomplishments, but at the same time, it's sad because that's where our population went.
They want more. They wanted a paid vacation, and they wanted retirement, and you don't have it when you work for yourself on the water. I got to pay my own health benefits. Of course, I'm on Medicare now. When I was growing up, we had Blue Cross and Blue Shield, which is quite expensive.
My mom doesn't understand that if you take a week off from work, it's okay, that there is such thing as a vacation and you can get paid for it.
Maria, that's a story all your own. She was getting ready to go to high school. She said, Ma, it's one thing, you can take this to the bank. I'm not picking crabs, and I'm not standing here making cakes and cooking like you do. I said, well, what do you want to do, young lady? She said, I want to wear high heels and work in the city and carry a briefcase in my hand.
I don't necessarily remember saying that, but I guess I met my goal.
She went to Washington College and got a good job in D.C., and that's where she met Brooks, her husband.
When I was living in Tylerton in the 80s, I'd have bet you that 2 of the Marshall's kids, Kevin and Jamie, were going to be lifelong watermen. They probably thought so too then.
I truly thought I'd stay to Smith Island on Tylerton especially, till I died. I just wish that I could make enough money where it was easier for me to have my living on the island. I might leave the water indirectly, but as far as the water leaving me, no, that's running through my veins. I have a complete fabrication shop building anywhere from full boats, as you can see, fuel tanks, T-tops, arches, rails, anything that's got to do with boats. With not many kids coming up, not many young couples, it's going to be really hard to maintain that island. I don't know how that place will survive.
I wanted to crab, and I wanted to pursue our family, history and legacy, but I also wanted to serve our country. So I enlisted in the Marine Corps when I was 17, and I was thinking about making a career of it, but the water kept calling me back. I said, I gotta go. I want to go home. I want to go home. Come home and went crabbing. Then I didn't have any insurances anymore, and I really couldn't afford them. Got a job while I was home at the prison.
He was trying to work the prison and trying to work here on the water, and one evening going over all dressed in his uniform, he fell asleep and run his boat directly into the lighthouse going in Chrisfield. And why he wasn't killed was because of our prayers. I believe the angels was right around him. He was going full throttle.
He worked to the prison for a few years, and he didn't like that, and then he went into state police.
At 43 years old, with all my military service and everything that I've had at the prison and state, I will be retiring this November 1st.
Retiring to a marshal doesn't mean the same thing as it means to most of us. Jamie may be leaving the state police, but he's a special agent for the Coast Guard Reserve, a resource officer for the local school, and he has his new store, Marshall Marine.
We opened up our business called Marshall's Marine. in Chrisfield. It's a boat place. Love boats, love being on the water. I probably will go crabbing again one day to teach my boys on how to do it.
I tell you, I believe I grew up in the best of times on the water. I mean, we had freedoms to work and to do things that we can't do now. And quite frankly, you can make a good living if you worked at it. Right now, they have to spend anywhere from $70,000 to $100,000 to get ready for a crabbing if you don't already have your rig. And back there then, we started out with a skiff. We worked our way up to another scraping boat, and from a scraping boat up to what they called a rhinestone. You worked your way up. It was a lot of work, but it was fun. It's nothing like going out and catching crabs or oysters. It's like finding money on the bottom.
And I don't really see it coming back. You're not gonna have anybody just come there, move there, and buy a whole rig of pots. I think a crab pot now rigged up, about $40, $45. It costs too much. It just costs too much money.
The last generation of watermen are the generation after me. It's the younger people just after me, which are, most of them are in their 50s, and that's it. I mean, I don't know nobody after them that's interested.
When I was a kid, you kept your house nice, your yard nice. You went to church in a suit, and watermen over home were prominent people. They were well respected and looked up upon. When you're a kid in high school and even in grade school, Dad, what do you want to be when you grow up? I'm gonna be a crab potter, I'm gonna be a waterman, or I'm gonna be a scraper, or I'm gonna be a tonger or an oysterman. That's what you would say, because you'd see these big, strong men with these big, hard hands, and you wanted to be a man.
Dwight was more than a harvester. He was a student of markets, phoning seafood buyers after a long day on the water, even hopping a truck from Chrisfield to check out places like New York's Fulton Fish Market. He installed a freezer to hold his catch and extended already long work days running his own seafood sales routes on the mainland, all to free himself from depending on the daily market set by middlemen. But it wasn't all work. For years, Dwight and the 36-foot Miss Marshall were famous bay-wide for dominating the boat docking contests so beloved of watermen.
I don't even know how many I have won, but I never did have hydraulic steering when I was in the contest. It's come a long way in that kind of stuff. They're so quick now that I couldn't go up against them.
Kevin followed in his father's footsteps, maybe I should say wake, until his knees gave out a couple of years ago. Jamie's still going strong. The crowd was just going nuts. I was like, I could not contain this excitement. And Dad said, Jamie, you ought not act like that. There's nobody in Tangier boat docks no more, nobody in Smith Island, nobody in Chrisfield, no watermen and stuff around home, and people don't want to do it. I'm like the only one left.
Dwight Marshall, say hello. There it is.
On top of everything else they did, Marietta and Dwight ran a store. After they sold it, there came a point where Tylerton had no store. I remember huddling in a waterman's cold shanty drinking bad coffee that winter. Pretty grim time. That was when Duke, their oldest son, a successful insurance agent on the mainland, began commuting back on weekends to run a new little market he and his brother Kevin built. Duke could have made more profitable investments, but it was his way of giving back to a place he always felt bad he had to leave.
It wasn't to get rich, that was for sure, but it was to help the community that helped me. So just help yourself and I'll come back and get you.
One of the things that happened there, he wanted a good crab cake. So he said, you need to tweak this and tweak it and keep working on it till you get it like we want. So Duke and Dwight were the tasters. I would mix it up and cook it. Nope, this ain't it. I'd mix up another batch and cook it. Nope, it's not it. So this one day in particular, I mixed up this batch. Whatever you've done, don't change it. I said, Lord, I don't even know what I've put in here. They said, well, you've got to go back and retrack it because this is perfect. It's delicious. That crab cake not only helps the store because they're known for their crab cakes, but it's turned into a business for me. It's like every which way I turn, I ship crab cakes all over the United States, everywhere.
Our biggest secret of that crab cake is Smith Island crab meat, which, you know, again, employs people from around here. They pick the crab and make money from that, and certainly the watermen catch it and all, but also it just gives it a better flavor. She's also known, you know, as the cake lady, and she didn't invent the Smith Island cake, as somebody said, but she helped make it famous.
So one day I was here and the phone rang and it was tourism called. This was 10 years ago. And they said, Marietta, we would love for you to go to Annapolis and represent us getting the Smith Island cake, the state dessert. And the reason I'm telling you this, I didn't have a dream in the world that the Lord would open up a new chapter in my life, because that's exactly what happened. From the day that became the dessert and went public in the paper, my life took a whole new change. My phone started ringing for cakes. They'd call me because they wanted to talk to me. I think they liked to hear my brew. It's also changed Smith Island's life, because I think it put Smith Island on the map. I really do. It don't look like icing, does it? But it will when I get a block of butter in it. We've been out here inhabited since the 1600s. But all of a sudden, everybody wants to come see where this cake is, where it is located, who the people are. And you have to kind of work with this quick. If you don't, it will set up on you.
Duke, along with other islanders, has been trying to rethink the island's future.
A few weeks ago, I went to a symposium in Michigan called Working Waterfronts. They talked about shorelines, erosion, they talked about the populations. Why do people live on islands? How do you attract people? How do you make a living off of islands? Ecotourism. So when we think our struggle is just unique to us, it's not. We talked about the projects that Smith Island has. The Living Shorelines, which is an outstanding project. They just spent almost $20 million with a new jetty system for Rhodes Point. People say, why do you need a new jetty system? Why are you spending money on an island that's sinking? We don't believe in that we're sinking, we're eroding, and this is definitely a fix to that. Look at Poplar Island, which is nearing $700 million for a bunch of birds. And when you ask for a few million for Smith Island, it seems like it's pulling teeth. It's a struggle.
The island here doesn't have a police force. What governs our island is our church.
Smith Island has 3 churches, all Methodist, but only one pastor. Everett Landon, an island native and former waterman, commutes by boat to Tylerton to serve its dwindling congregation.
Dwight has always believed in tithing. One time in particular, was $1 sitting on our table, and I knew it weren't more money there, and I took it and I put it in the collection.
$1 weren't going to do me much good. Got down that low.
You can really tell the difference when people are crabbing and they've had a good week, the money will go up.
It'll come back to you. If the Lord don't bless us, we're in a heap of trouble, I'll put it that way. He supplies the crabs and oysters, and fish, and everything, and he does a pretty good job of it, I'd say. I don't think nobody's ever really gone hungry around here.
People ask me why I refer to the Smith Island as the Rock. It's a place of stability. something that's not moved. And if you use the biblical part of it, the wise man built his house upon the rock, not the sands. So I like to think that Smith Island has been the mainstay of the rock for many people, many generations.
My life now is I'm semi-retired, and more semi, I think, than retired. I had quadruple bypass and I had double knee replacement, and they throwed me for a loop. And I do a little crabbing, do a little crab potting, and I have some restaurants I deal with, and that seems to help me. And of course, Mary, she's got a business of her own there too.
The older you get, you wonder if you're doing right to live here or not.
If you're on the mainland, you call an ambulance, they can be there to you and rush you to the hospital. Here, it's not that easy. It could mean death because you can't get them there in time.
I think I would have stayed on the island more if there had been a bridge, or, I mean, I know you can take the boat, but it's kind of hard to call into a boss and be like, you know, it's too windy, it's too foggy, can't make it in today.
The Bay Foundation Chesapeake Bay Foundation has 2 facilities here in Tylerton. And they do what they call a town tour, and the little children come to our door and knock, and they'll ask us a couple questions. We'll say, do you have TV? Do you have computer? I'll say, we have iPads, iPods, we got anything that the mainland has, except in a highway. And I wish we would sometime have a highway to get to Crisfield when it's blowing 40 miles and you have a doctor's appointment.
I'll never forget where I come from, and it's always there. And if I have an opportunity to do something to bring Smith Islanders back, I'll do it.
We can hope the island has another chapter left, maybe more in retirees and vacationers than in following the water business, as they say out here.
When I go back home to Smith Island, I'm like, who's that? I don't even know who that is anymore. Visitors come in, they want to be part of Smith Island from the Smith Island that I came from, but unfortunately it's not there anymore.
Seems like a lot of the houses are now people who don't live here. They're people who have come, fell in love with the island, and have basically a summer home or just a getaway home.
Our family's been here since 1608, and my parents are the caretakers, and sometimes I wonder, are they the last caretakers of that land?
I truly don't believe they'll move. That's what they've worked their whole life for. We got a beautiful home right there on the water. Most people in the world who love the water would kill for that sunset. Why would you want to leave that?
We have thought several times about moving, but to really go out, turn that key on your door for the last time, I can't talk about it because I get all filled up.
Chesapeake writer Gilbert Byron called watermen the greatest poets who never wrote a line. Their lives essayed upon a fluid environment, inscribed in the seagrass meadows where they sought crabs, on the shallow bars where they tonged oysters, in the close-knit villages so vulnerable to flood and storm. Someday, waves may overlap all physical evidence that the poetry ever existed. Lamenting the future shouldn't crowd out celebration. If the Marshalls and their island are in the last chapters, they leave in a flourish of chocolate cake and succulent crab meat. No bitter taste there. They have endured long and well, against all odds. No more than a drop in the ocean of time and space on planet Earth. But my, how it did sparkle, how it shone.
I don't know what the future holds, but as long as I'm able, I won't stay here. This is home.